Good morning this time. I think we're safe.
Good afternoon.
I've got the right headphones on, so I can't actually hear you. So welcome everyone to episode 104 of The Raise. In this episode, we're actually going to begin diving into the morning this time. I think we're going to be diving into the actual pitch deck and all the ins and outs of that process. In case you don't know, or this is your first time, we highly recommend that you go check out all the previous episodes at foundercraft.com/raise. But The Raise is a real-time interactive series on how to raise money. It stars me, Greg Narain, founder of a new company called Fundraising, where I will be sharing my journey so you can learn from the process as I go through it. And also my friend Pankaj here. He'll introduce himself in a minute. But this is not a workshop or a seminar. What it is actually behind the scenes look at the research, decisions, the actions that I'm actually going to take while raising money for my next startup, Fundraising. We hope that by letting you see sort of everything that I'm going through, that you'll also get to understand, the process and to, follow along with your own efforts out there as you're going through the fundraising process.
Thanks, Greg. I'm Pankaj. I am going to be working with Greg as a mentor and also giving him some insight into how angels and VCs think and work. I'll be asking him questions that an investor might ask him when he's going out to pitch them. However, I'll also be sharing my thoughts and insights into the best way to answer some of these questions and also share what an investor might be thinking but not necessarily saying. More importantly, we want to know your questions. So ask them in the comments, go to the website, foundercraft.com/raise, or email us at raise@foundercraft.com. All right, Greg, let's get into it.
All right. So this is quite a busy episode. I prepared quite a bit for it. So I hope you guys all appreciate it out there. So Pankaj, we the one of the most challenging parts, I think, for most people, and one of the things that you will iterate the most on in the fundraising process is ultimately going to be this pitch deck, right? And there are a lot of different opinions and theories about the right way, the right order, the right slides, etc. There's generally some consensus that there should be around kind of like 10 slides to sort of cover, some high level basics. I'm just going to read some of the ones that you've listed here. There's the opening slide, the problem, the solution, the total addressable market, your traction, your business model, your competition, your team, the ask, aka how much are you looking for, the roadmap, and then a closing slide of some sort, largely just to drive people back towards it. Now, we have got a lot to go through, and I know we're going to do a deep dive into my actual presentation afterwards, but I know there were some thoughts that you wanted to share as well that you thought were really important.
No, I appreciate that, Greg. So, one of the things I like to tell founders, and I think we've briefly discussed this in some of the previous episodes, is, have 3 different templates. The first deck that you have or template that you might use is really something that's going to be a slight overview of things, a teaser with nothing proprietary in it, nothing that you wouldn't mind going public if somebody posted on Facebook. There's no issues with you saying that you're fundraising. There's no ask in there. But it gives somebody an overview of what the business is and what you're doing and what problem you're solving, right? So that's something that you can share it with some friends. If they know some folks, they can just forward it on. You're not really worried about who takes a look at that. In fact, you're probably hoping that more people will look at it than don't. So that's one deck, right? It's short teaser. It could be, a 1-pager. It could be 2 or 3 slides, not really more than that. The second deck that I think founders should have is something that you're going to be presenting in person to or via a video conference, right? It's something that is going to be visual, not necessarily a lot of text. The audience should be listening to you, not reading what's on the slide. And you're probably going to go into a lot of detail about your business when you're presenting this deck, right? So all that detail should be up here, not necessarily on the slides itself. So it's something that you probably want to rehearse. It's going to be Spartan in terms of text, but it will have a lot of content that you're going to add to it as you're speaking with the investors, right? So that's the second type. That's a live pitch. And the third deck is a deck that you're going to mail out to investors. Now, you might be mailing it out directly. You might have somebody that's going to refer you, and they might mail it out. Regardless, it's going to have a little bit more text than the second type of template that I mentioned. It's the one that's not necessarily being presented out. So you want to have a little bit more content in there that somebody can follow through as they're skimming through it. The important thing to think about and remember when you're preparing this particular deck is no investor is going to spend more than 30 to 60 seconds on it. Some investors might spend 2 to 3 minutes on it, but generally, put the deck together, assuming that people are going to be on it for about 60 seconds, no more. So you're going to have a little bit more text. It's going to be probably 10 to 15 slides maximum. You don't want to go more than that. I've seen decks that are 45 slides. I've seen decks that are 70 slides. And, when you see decks like that, you really begin to wonder what people are thinking, right? Because when somebody gets a deck that long, they don't necessarily have the context, right? And you're not there to put the context in place. So it really doesn't make sense to do that. You really want to give a quick summary. The objective of this deck that you're mailing out to investors is not to get them to write you a check, right? And I want to reiterate that. No one is going to write you a check after looking at your deck. Your objective here is to get a meeting with them, right? Whether it's in person or virtual, it doesn't matter. You want to meet them, you want to talk to them, and you want to explain to them what you're doing and put context around this deck. And then hopefully you'll have the second deck that I mentioned there to go through in person with them. So, it's just enough to tease them and get them excited about meeting you and hearing from you what you're doing. One more thing, having a combo of the second and third deck to email out to investors after the presentation could also be useful in case some investors ask for more information. You could also just email out the other deck that you have. Oops, sorry about that. You can also email that deck out that you presented to them. But you could also just have a combination of, decks 2 and 3 mashed together that is kind of a post-meeting follow-up, right?
Quick question.
Yeah.
Do you are there any guidance or rules that you have about not sending a deck? Like, should you be worried ever if someone asks for a deck too soon, or how far it may go?
No, look, I mean, as an investor, anytime somebody wants to present their company to me, I think a deck is a quick and easy way for me to just filter the deal really quickly and say, okay, is this worth me spending more time on, or is it not? Right. So that's why I suggest having that teaser available. Right. You can email that out without anything public or anything private getting out there. Right. So this is something that you can email out and somebody will look at it and say, okay, yeah, this makes sense. This is kind of deal flow that I like to see. I want to see, dive into some more details. So could you send me something a little bit more detailed? And that's when perhaps you can send over the second deck, which is a little bit more detailed, but again, doesn't give away too much that's proprietary. And, when you're out there presenting to them in person, that's when you're going into a lot of detail.
Yeah. So I'll ask a question, maybe a little too late to put the, toothpaste back in the tube. We're doing this in open.
Yeah.
Is there really anything to worry about? I mean, to some degree, what we're saying is, I'm saying in this deck probably nothing I wouldn't say if I met anybody or if I went to a pitch competition or anything like that. Like, right. Why worry about it, I guess?
Well, sometimes there are things that a competitor might learn that you don't necessarily want them to know about right now. You want to be an important threat for them to start worrying about you, not something that too early they just say, oh, you know what? We should just start building this into our product or our platform. So that's, one obvious problem with going public with too much proprietary information too early. Another thing is competitors. Competitive investments. So sometimes if you share something that's too detailed with an investor and you haven't done your homework, something we talked about in one of the previous episodes, if you haven't done your homework to know that they have a competitive investment or something that could be competitive relatively easily, you don't necessarily want them having too much information about what you're doing before you're actually ready to sit down with them and hear that they're interested in investing, right? So that means not necessarily a term sheet. No one's going to give you a term sheet until they dive into a lot of detail. But you want to understand, okay, if you have any competitive investments, what stage are they at? Are they a real threat to you? Are they, going in a different direction than you are? So, that's another reason why you probably want to keep some things close to the vest until you've gotten a little bit further along in the cycle.
Gotcha. That makes sense. Let me think.
Oh, one other thing I wanted to add real quick was, as you're emailing out these decks and as you're presenting them, not necessarily the first deck, but the second one and the third one that I mentioned, I think it's a good idea to customize those for each investor that you meet. And that's not necessarily a brand new deck for each of them, but if for example, you're pitching a angel investor who has done a lot of investments in the social media marketing space, right? So you probably want to bring in some things that are specific to that individual investor into that deck. And so that way they see that, hey, you put in the work to talk to them.
Right. These are not the main deck, but just sort of the tertiary.
The one that you're presenting.
Yeah. Okay. Gotcha.
Right. And I think that's probably the one that's most important because that's where the conversation takes over. It's not necessarily the deck that's driving the discussion. It's really their interest levels in your business. If if you're pitching somebody in person and you're just going from slide to slide, that means they're not really that interested. But if you get through the first two slides and suddenly you never turn to another slide again, it's because they're interested and they're asking you a lot of questions and you're having a conversation, right? So that's you want to have those slides there as kind of a backup for having some data and give you kind of a roadmap that you want to move the conversation into, but you're not necessarily going to be going one slide after the other.
And two more questions. When you say deck, I know we're using the word deck, but do you recommend like flattening it down to like a PDF or by the way, like attachments or like linking to it,
Yeah, I think that's a little bit of a personal preference for a lot of folks. I think a PDF is kind of standard, especially when you're emailing it out to folks. So PDF is standard, but some people like DocSend.
How do you feel about those services?
I personally hate it. I find it really annoying. It's just it's adding another step for me to do to get information that you want to give to me. I understand why people do it. You want to capture email addresses. You want to kind of contain where it's being forwarded around. Well, that's why you have the teaser deck, right? 1 to 3 slides, perhaps, that can just be emailed out. Some people like a Dropbox link because it doesn't clutter up their mailbox. Other people like to have the attachment sent to them because now they have a repository in their email that they can go back to if they need to later on and review something. That could also be a challenge for you, right? So you meet me, you email me your deck, I go through it. There's a good amount of detail in it. I like it, but I just eventually decide to pass, right? And you go on your way. And a year from now, somebody else comes along and says, you know what, I'm doing something similar to Funabulous. And I meet them and I'm like, hey, this is fantastic. I love you guys. Now, I'm not going to be unethical and share your deck with them, but I might go back to your old deck to see, there's some information in here that's useful and important, not necessarily proprietary to Funabulous, but more market information that I could potentially share with this other company, right? So, there are pros and cons to doing that. And, if you are sending out a Dropbox link or a DocSend, you can just shut down that link and people can't go back to it afterwards. So there is a move towards doing that more and more. I like to get decks that are PDFs and open them up on my iPad and scribble on them and take notes on them, right? So there are different reasons why people prefer different things. I think the way that founders should look at it is, what do you prefer? If you are bandwidth constrained, you have a pretty low bit rate on your internet connection, all right, just email a link out. Put it up on Dropbox and email a link out. I think DocSend adds a lot more friction than emailing out a link. So, yeah.
I think that makes sense. The second one was related to sort of that.
Okay.
The sharing services. I know, look, classic salespeople want to track things too, right? So we see enough of that.
And fundraising is a sales process.
Absolutely. So, I'm not decided yet on what's going to work best for me either.
Yeah.
And so, I think we'll figure it out, as we get there. I also haven't actually practiced pitching my deck yet. So today, as we go through, I'll just largely be sharing the thought gathering process more so than the actual, hey, here's the pitch.
Yep. Absolutely. I think that's kind of what some of our viewers want to see, is like, how are you gathering this information? How are you framing this information?
Yeah.
So I think that'll be useful for folks.
Well, maybe we should get into it then.
Yes, let's do that.
All right. So I apologize to everyone, but I'm going to be using Keynote because it is the tool that I am the most comfortable in, and I really, honestly cannot stand Google Slides. I tried to import this, but it did not work as I was intending. Now, Pankaj, maybe as we go to each slide, maybe you can provide just early a little bit of a overview of what you hope to see as we approach this slide.
Yeah. Okay. So the problem, I think a lot of people confuse problem and solution. I've seen this a lot where founders will see their solution as something that is really unique and different, and now they'll kind of retrofit a problem on top of it. Mm-hmm. So what I want to see when I see a problem or a founder talking about a problem is a problem that we can relate to. The average person can relate to it in some way. Or, if you're talking about some deep tech problem that you're solving, well, I may not be an expert in it, but I've probably read about it, right? So it's something that I will understand. It's something that I can say, yeah. I know this is a problem. People have talked about it, right? So either I can relate to it myself, or it's a problem that somebody else has talked about and independently said that this is a problem, right? So that's something that I want to see when people are talking about the problem.
Okay. And then just to be clear, like, is this the grandma test or is this like an investor test?
So this is going to be the investor test. This is not going to be the grandma test, or if some of you have not read it, the mom test. Great book, and I suggest all founders read the mom test. I forgot who wrote it, but I think it's readily available on Amazon. So yeah, this is not the mom test. This is not the grandma test. Ideally, you're pitching somebody who understands the industry that you're in, or at least has a passing understanding of it. They are technically savvy. They are hearing about and seeing interesting products in the tech space all the time. So, I don't think you need to worry about mom or grandma too much.
Okay. Yeah, no, I just want to make sure, because I do feel like a lot of the conflicting advice you get is you should be able to compact it down into like 5 words and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And there's a lot of these sort of things that sort of say, do it really short, but do it smart. And it's like, but smart means that they're more informed, et cetera, or.
I think brevity is different, right? Yeah. I think, yes, if you can put the problem into one sentence, that's fantastic, right? That means that you really understand the problem and you figured out how to communicate that out properly. So if you can get it down to that stage, wonderful. If not one, all right, 2 sentences, right?
Yeah.
But if you start going into like, a whole thesis on the problem, well, people are going to tune out.
Yeah, I'm with you. Okay, well, I'm going to show you the process I use to sort of arrive at that sentence, and let's see if it's useful to everyone else. When I start thinking about this, for me, I live by this idea that quote unquote people have problems, and so like the problems aren't sort of existential or sort of just out there in the world, but they have to be experienced by someone. Can everyone see? Or I can make it probably bigger, but
that's better for sure.
Let me see if I can hide this. How do I get rid of? No, slide only. Here we go. It's better, but let me see if I fit it. All right, you can sort of see it.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I apologize, everyone, but yeah, I'll be annotating verbally. So in my world, the quote unquote people that we think about are 2 kinds. They're influencers, and there are brands. And each of these groups has a number of different sort of like constituencies within it. So on the influencer side, if you're not aware, there are many strata of influencers, from the celebrities like the Kim Kardashians, the one that we're familiar with, down to now what they call nano influencers, which are really like these individuals like me who have like more than 1,000 followers, like on Instagram or Twitter or whatever it may be, that are emerging in influence over time. Right. And brands are increasingly, by the way, working more and more with the micro and the nano influencers. On the brand side, there's any number of different people who have kind of the problems that we are sort of seeing. And so those includes everyone from SMBs, small, medium-sized businesses, direct-to-consumer brands, CPG brands, retailers, and even like food, fast-moving consumer goods as well. So when I think about people or the problem, is contextualized to these 2 major domes of people, right? Influencers and brands, ultimately. Right now, how do I advance? This is the problem. Let me see. It's for you. Slide. There's no way to like just go to the next slide though. All right. So now when I have these people, I then try to say, well, what actual problems do they have, right? And so I went through and I tried to categorize sort of some of these problems. And now you can see why I view these 2 groups as so coherent, because of that middle column where they all share a fairly common thing. Now, our audience is anybody who's got a social following, who's building a following out there in the world. And so naturally, all of them share sort of this desire to grow their audience, right? If you're an influencer, that's how you make money. And if you're a brand, that's how you make money, right? You want to know your audience because knowing your audience is how you get better engagement, right? And knowing your audience is ultimately how you figure out if you're reaching the right people. That leads to the next point, which is like, I want to make content that matters, that people find engaging or entertaining or informative, right? And then ultimately, no matter what I am, if I'm an influencer, I'm indirectly turning my audience into money. And if I'm a brand, I'm directly turning my audience into money. But no matter what, the idea is that I want to turn all those followers into some kind of revenue opportunity, right? Now, on the influencer side, they're also now looking for like brands that they can work with, right? And they're also looking for as many ways to make money, right? Diversify the different kinds of ways that they can make money. On the brand side, they're at the same time looking for, hey, who are the influencers that I could work with, right? And then how do I prove the ROI to my boss? And ultimately, like, as we said, how do I generate revenue, right? And so this was like, in putting this slide together, I found there was a lot of approaches I had originally thought about taking with the problem slide, right? And I found that I find it hard to get to this point. It honestly took me like dozens and dozens of interactions, right? And I wrote out like several versions of like these narratives to try and give myself sort of some footing. And then I worked a little bit backwards from sort of what I call these candidates of like how I would describe the problem. So, I said that companies spend tons of money on social marketing, but it isn't tracked like the rest of their marketing. Brands are working with influencers, but don't know who they're reaching, modern marketers tools. So I sort of played around. I sort of had these like broad clusters of problems, like, oh, well, a lot of money is going to social, but like it's not treated the same way, or influencers are growing in popularity and that's an uncovered space, or, you know, like audiences are essentially unknown to the people who are growing them, right? Like, so these were like the major themes. And finally I got to using this framework of just starting to ask myself these better questions, like, well, who am I really trying to reach? And then what are the problems that they have?
Yeah.
And I describe this actually as what I call it, the problem prism.
Okay.
Right. And so in my mind, the problem prism is really like, it's what I just described, right? Which is that as a founder, I see all of these problems that I solve, and I don't know, I had a hard time choosing which was the real problem. Right?
Yeah.
So when you think about a prism, what it does is it turns light and separates it into sort of its constituent parts. Yep. And as a founder trying to make this pitch or this presentation to someone, I need them to see the light, not the colors, right? So I need to find a way for them to understand the broad problem that unifies all of these other smaller problems. And I think that's the challenge that you've got to work through as a founder yourself, putting your problem slide together. Don't get fooled by the minutia, all the smaller little things that, like, say, a feature reconciles for you. It's really about that broader problem that you're actually solving. So I then said, well, let me look at the problems that I actually am talking about here. And I went back and reclassified my actual problems to see if I could group them into some more meaningful categories to see if there's some commonality. And so one of the first problems I noticed was, like, there's stuff about my audience, right? Like where I don't quite know who my audience is, or I'm missing some detail about my audience. And that was sort of problematic. I then had a lot of things that fell into this bucket of, hey, how do I get more return from the time I spend, the money I spend?
Yeah.
And then I ultimately found that these two here sort of fell into a bucket about discovery. Like, how do I find the right people or the right influencers or the right brands and things like that? And so now seeing these problems clustered, it started to help me find a story about the individual, the overall story that was going on, right? And so I started to try and put that together. And this is where I ended up next. So I took those things and I said, well, now how do I reduce this a little bit so that I can sort of make it a little bit more easy to understand? Well, what's a way to talk about these people, influencers and brands? And so I said, well, these are all social businesses of one form, right? Yeah. It's a little bit of a loose term, so I don't love it, by the way. Like, I originally actually had social marketers, but I don't know that influencers per se like call themselves marketers. But of course, I think they are marketers. Yeah. But I do think they are creating businesses, right? Like, and they are social first businesses. And so this is an area where I think I'll have to explore and reconcile or play with over time. And then I said, well, now if we look at these different problems that actually people have, so what does it really boil down to, right? Like, what's the salient thing, right? So classic in sales, right? I'd rather give you something that's going to make you money than something that saves you time or is a painkiller, right? I want to really, like, sorry, I don't want to give you an aspirin. And so for me, the ROI thing was the most powerful of those. And I also felt the other two were in service of ROI. The broader ROI revenue story. Yeah. And so I reduced down these three problems to needing to prove ROI and drive revenue, right? Is really fundamentally social businesses need to prove ROI and drive revenue. This is sort of in the heart of me, what I believe is the big problem that we are trying to solve for our customer.
That's fantastic. Now, I'm just curious, Greg, how long did it take you to get from starting putting all this stuff together to actually having this problem statement?
So I work, constantly behind the scenes, like in my brain. So I have probably done versions of this, for months now.
Okay.
And
that's just thinking about it.
Just thinking about it, but more so like I've actually gone and had my problem candidates. I have a doc, which I won't bore you with showing, but like I made a doc that actually listed the problems and started to try to gather facts and tried to support these statements with like data that I could find out there. And I just wasn't sure about them per se. And so these all became the feeders into how I understood at least the lights in my prism, the individual problems in my prism, but they didn't necessarily give me a story that went together yet.
Yeah. Okay.
Now, let's be clear here. This is not enough, right?
Yeah.
This does not sell a problem.
Absolutely.
So I then said to myself, well, why do these people have these problems? Right? Like, I mean, these don't seem like things that normal people can't figure out, right? And so I had to question myself and challenge myself to say, well, I understand that these are things that gripe about or are frustrated by, but does that mean it's really a problem? Or more importantly, is there a business there to solve that problem, right? And so as I dug in a little bit, I then said, well, let me now think about this. And problems really don't matter if we don't know why they exist. Right. And so I started to drill in a little bit on some of these problems a little bit more. And I'll zoom in just a little bit here. But as you can see, I started to think about the various things that were going on. And I said, well, what's the problem? Why can't you tell who's in your audience, for example? Well, I said, well, guess what? The social platforms actually don't want you to know who's in your audience, right? They have a wonderful Ponzi scheme going on where we pay to create their audience for them. And then we pay rent to basically access our own audience, right? Yep. So the data that you get, most common set of data from, for example, social platforms is age, sex, and location. That's all you really get from all the social platforms.
Yeah.
But if you go buy an ad, there's like 500 other attributes that you can target on, right? Amazing. But we don't get that for free.
Yep.
So there's no audience tools. Then I said, well, what about the revenue and the ROI thing? My favorite, right? My organizing one. Well, and I said, well, the social process is a much longer sales cycle, right? Like, someone could be a follower for gosh knows how long, like years and years and years before they actually convert to buying something, right? Like, whereas like say in B2B, your sales cycle fairly rigidly, right? It's like we have about a 6 month and, our goal is always to make that shorter and shorter. In the consumer thing, it can be almost instantaneous because people can do whimsical purchases, right? But the sales cycle is much more known in B2B and B2C. But on social media and social marketing, it's a lot longer cycle because it's a lot more unknown, right? Like we don't actually have a way to pin it down. And there isn't really a lot of good ways to market to people because, as I was saying before, your content's organically kind of doesn't necessarily reach everybody. And then it's, you still have to, if you want, you have to buy ads to try and reach anybody. So really the ability to convert people was sort of lacking, right? On Instagram, the most popular platform by far for marketers, there's only one link. It's in your profile, right? Your bio. Or if you have 10,000 followers or more, you can do swipe ups, right? But still only 2 ways to link. Right? Like Instagram, the most popular platform for marketing on social, right? So that's why I think like conversion is really difficult. And then I said, well, what about P3? No, how about discovery? Well, the whole ecosystem it's a wild west out there, right? Like we don't know like if an influencer is good or not. We don't know if a brand is good to work with or not, right? We don't know when brands are looking for people, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And there just isn't a lot of visibility to the data behind the scenes because no one has the data to begin with, right? And so again, poor discovery tools became a thing. And if you notice, tools. The problem here is tools, right?
Yeah, or lack thereof.
The lack of tools, precisely, right? So as I said, well, that's interesting. Now we can put this all together, right? And so now if I actually combine all of these things back together, what we find is my problem statement. That social businesses need to prove ROI and drive revenue, but don't have the tools they need.
Nice. So I think this is wonderful because it distills down who your customer is. It solves for what exactly are you going to do for them and why they need it. So I think this is fantastic.
Great. Well, at least I got that part. Now, I have the final slides. that I put together. So I'm curious, would you like to see that slide now, or do you want me to go through the rest?
I think we should continue going through the rest, unless folks that are watching have a preference. We'll give people a second to kind of.
1 second. Do you want to see how I rendered this slide now into a real thing?
Yeah.
Drop us a comment, or should I move on to the market slide, which is the second one I did? Dun, dun. I see there's people out there, so I guess people are happy with our decision. They want to keep going.
All right. Let's see what you eventually moved on to.
All right. So next, I went into the market because in varying things I looked up or read, I sort of got this idea that the next part was to prove how big this opportunity was before I even talked about why I was a good person to solve it or how our solution was good. So I then said, well, let's go look at the market. And here's the summary, right? We make products for social businesses. And in my mind, a social business is any business leveraging social media and tools to build an audience they can monetize, right?
So like what we're doing.
Yeah, kind of like what we're doing, right? Like we are a social business actually unto ourselves, right? And so I said, okay, great. Well, that's a good start. Now, how do I quantify that or make that market seem reasonable? And so we go back again to my original thing, right? And if you look, these are some examples again of our social businesses, right? All of these different constituents, right? So all of these nano influencers all the way up to the celebrities and all these SMBs, direct to consumer brands. I personally don't think the B2B side is as functional for us, but I certainly know that our product works on LinkedIn just as well. And LinkedIn, Facebook, and blogs cover like 90% of the social marketing for B2B marketers. So I do believe we have room to work there. I just don't know that that's like the first customer that's going to grab onto us. So I do think there are a lot of different kinds of social businesses out there, in case you were wondering. And then I started to try and look into the reasons why this matters, right? And I'll read these for you if you can't see it, but I said like there's a lot of potential customers, right? Did you know that there are 284 million potential influencers on Instagram alone? Yeah. So from nano influencer, that's like someone with 1,000+ followers. And obviously not all of those people are going to fit into that bucket, right?
Yeah.
But at the same time, Facebook has 65 million local business pages on it as well, right? So again, there's a ton of people using social that are in business, right? Now, also, more and more businesses are moving their budgets to social. So we've got $74 billion spent on social ads in 2018. About 14% of the marketing budget is actually being moved over to social, and it's largely coming from out of marketing, right? Some big companies pull it out of PR, but ultimately it's coming out of marketing, right? So now we're at 13.8% of that budget, right? Now, by the way, the global spend on marketing is like $1.3 trillion. So it's a hefty number, right? Being spent on social. There's also 7 million different companies advertising or individuals advertising on Facebook, right? Discrete advertisers on Facebook, another 2 million on Instagram, and Stories, which is where our product shines, has got 3 million across the Facebook family. So that's the social part. Then the CRM marketing stuff is just huge and it's everywhere, right? Like who doesn't use CRM, right? Like I feel stupid even saying this, but 87% of the world uses a SaaS CRM. That's about $120 billion globally spent on CRM. And in marketing automation, 75% use some kind of marketing automation, at least one tool, email, A/B testing, whatever it may be, which is another $25 billion in expected sort of value by 2023. So we're marketing automation and CRM. Those are two big buckets. It's well known to the business world. It's a little less known, I think, to the social marketers because a lot of them are new to business themselves. So I think it presents a great opportunity to bring those people into the fold and give them a tool that's really dedicated for them. And at the same time, influencer marketing is growing. It's what I've done my last two businesses in. And so I get this space really well. This year alone, or last year was $8 billion spent on influencer marketing. It may be as much as $10 billion this year. It's another 63% of influencer budgets are increasing. And then here's the interesting part. Brands want more from influencer marketing, right? Like 75% of brands cannot determine the ROI of their influencer marketing. And instead of actually getting real ROI or revenue, they rely on these like really crappy things, right? Like, effective CPM and like all these other metrics that aren't literally the reason they're doing it, right? Like they're trying to make money, right? Like, so they were like, I feel like the brand awareness thing is certainly valuable, but it's the crutch because we can't actually prove revenue, right? The second we can prove revenue, no one's going to be talking about brand awareness, right? Like, sure, like, some of the PR and marketing teams will still be investing in getting brand awareness out there. But the reality is we're doing all of this to make money, right? And then again, picking the right influencer is also hard. So even here, like 64% of brand marketers are concerned about influencer fraud. 36% say that recruiting influencers is their biggest challenge, right? It's still a hard thing to do, right? So that's how I thought about the market, right? Like really, like these are really big, colossal forces sort of coming together. There's not a lot of coverage in our part of the world because like it's traditionally been dominated by B2B and B2C sort of style conversations. And by the way, every company, there is a new breed, like direct to consumer, I believe is emerging as its own breed of customer, right? It's like a hybrid of that social first business, right? And then there are pure play social businesses like the influencers and whatnot, who are really creating their own business opportunities by only being social. So I do think like that's why I think this market opportunity is actually really, really large. Any thoughts on here? Because I'm about to go to solution.
I think you broke it down really well. I think it makes a lot of sense how you've approached looking at the various aspects of who is involved in this market, right? So both from the branding side, the influencer side, and I think the last part, which is picking the right influencer, is at least for me, is tying in nicely with the tools part that you talked about in the problem, right? So at least I'm starting to see more clarity around, these are tools to help you find the right influencers and measure the ROI and direct ROI, if possible, from using these tools, which people are not able to do today. So I see a large market, right, like billions and billions of dollars, as well as millions of people. And at the same time, I see a lack of tools that allows these people to spend that money effectively. So, the problem and the way that you're approaching it is by getting right to the market instead of going into the solution first is nice, because now it brings that together and it lets the person who's sitting in front of you or listening to you derive the solution themselves.
Right, exactly. That's what I was hoping.
Yeah.
Because I do think it's easy to also sometimes feel like this must be done already, or sort of wave a hand that you just do that in Salesforce or whatever. Ankur actually, Pankaj had a really good comment here. He says he feels like a lot of companies track their funnel all the way from clicks to sales via software like CleverTap, WebEngage, etc. So influencers are asked to use short URLs that feeds into analytics system. Okay, you are absolutely right. That is a part of the system. That is the bare minimum of how these things work today. But the problem with the way it works today is that those systems are largely data islands, right? Where one engagement with influencer number one, and then tomorrow it's going to be a different link over here, and then over there it's a poll or some other thing I did with a customer. And so what ends up happening is this data lives in a very disparate place. And so as a result, you don't yield the actual benefit of knowing a customer over time, because you're really living in a campaign-oriented world where you're just tracking the performance of the individual campaign instead of the broader metrics and performance over time. But thank you for that comment. Absolutely right. Yes, there are sites that Ankur also says that there are sites that offer catalog of influencers with their stats, also starting to roll out built-in analytic track source location. Absolutely true. Absolutely not what we're building. So we are not building a listing of influencers per se. We are building a listing of fans. And so where everyone else fails is that they stop at the influencer and they start to guess about who the fans are. We do not do that. We skip that layer and go directly to fans so we can actually tell you who you're really reaching instead of who we guess you're reaching. So let's go on to the solution. Thanks, Alcor. I appreciate those. So this is the part now, Punch, do you have thoughts on like what should happen in the solution?
So, I think it varies company to company, but generally we want to see is a connection between the problem that you identified, right? Now, there's the market comes into play as well, which you've done in the market slide. But, also sometimes it's the product, like actually showing the product and showing how it can do this easily. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's just like, look, this is the big black hole that exists, and this is what we're going to do to solve that, right? Sometimes it's a little obvious. Other times it's not so obvious. So, it's really about showing what you can build to target that problem that you've identified and, go after a large market. Some people will go into the market right after the solution, but, right before is also
these two definitely swap a lot from what, I've seen it. I often see problem solution as a very common pattern. I do think there is benefit, as I've tried to at least try, when there may not be certainty about what the market is, or where there may be too much wiggle room in what the market is. Like that's why I wanted my market slide first.
Yeah.
Because I wanted to sort of add some clarity about who we're talking to.
Absolutely. And it adds a lot of context that people would have missed out on otherwise.
Right. Because if I just said something like a generic term, you may not quite understand the nuance around it or something like that. Now, in addition on the solution, what I've seen, just for sharing my thoughts, I've seen sort of two prototypical sort of things. One is sort of like a benefit oriented sort of like bullet list. Like here's how we've like really reckoned the benefit of our method of reconciling the problem. Another common approach that I like as well, and that I've seen is I feel like the solution side is oftentimes like the schematic, like the high level diagram of like how your system works, but not necessarily like the screenshots of the product. Right?
Yeah.
It's the ecosystem that you're creating, or how the parts are interacting, but not necessarily like the up close visuals of like what that thing is.
Right. No, exactly. And that's why I said sometimes the product, actually seeing the product is more important.
So do you think in that case, just so folks know, that it's okay potentially to go straight to a product and not have like a solution?
So, if you're presenting it live to somebody, then this is a good opportunity to, you can put a couple of words out there and say, hey, this is the solution. And then just like, all right, here's a demo, right? And this is why, I think if you have a powerful, impactful demo, that speaks far more than any number of words on a slide will, for sure. But a lot of folks, especially really early stage companies, don't necessarily have a fully flushed out product that they can actually just, boom, go, sign up right now and demo it yourself. So I think that's for the founders to kind of see like, hey, can you do that? If you can, fantastic. If you can't, maybe you have a video of the product. It's scripted, but you can show people what it looks like. If you can't get the video because the product's still unstable, all right, do screenshots, right? So, investors understand that no one expects everyone to have a fully baked product that's ready to get sold into large enterprises on day one, right? We understand that this happens, right? Like code, you started writing this product fairly recently, and it's not fully baked yet. So it's okay. Don't be embarrassed about that, right? But show us what you have built, because that solves two problems for the founders, right? It shows that you can actually build a product, you can actually put it together so that it works, and it's visual, so it's more powerful than just words are, right? So you kind of start building some trust with the investors subconsciously that you can build a product, you can deploy a product, you can put together a well-crafted story about why this product is necessary and who's ready to pay for it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you for that. And let me dive in a little bit and show you, I guess, how I start to try to articulate the solution as well.
Yeah.
So here's where the first time you actually are finding out what we're making. And so, yes, we're building a CRM and marketing automation platform specifically for social businesses. In my head, I like you to think HubSpot or Salesforce, everyone with a social media presence that lets them track their followers and convert them to opportunities of all kinds. And so in my head, this is sort of like how I think about what we're making, right? Like at a top level, that is our solution. And then that begs the question, and I did a lot of research on this to say, like, and find out what makes a good CRM, right? There are some basic capabilities that need to be there: contact management, interaction management, lead management, reporting and analytics, right? And then I asked the same question about marketing automation. Well, what are sort of the state of the art here? It's landing pages, lead scoring, having obviously accurate customer data to work with, automated email workflows, and then personalization and dynamic content. These are in the wheelhouse. These are the tools that really make sort of, a good CRM and a good marketing automation platform. Now, what does our thing do, right? Well, it is not, in some cases, it's fairly similar, but there's our own spin and tint on it because we are building a verticalized solution for a specific kind of marketer. And so when I took these capabilities, I started to look at like the product and the features that we're offering and saying, well, we're going to actually translate a lot of these features over to the social realm, because while the concepts are similar, the implementation is different because the universe of customers and personas is actually changing, right? Mm-hmm. And so for contact management, we were looking at followers and fan management. For interaction management, it's about getting activity, event, engagement metrics. Lead management is one of our internal systems that we call our fan bases, which is the CRM. There's the landing pages themselves, which we do provide via our Fanabulous Asks, one part of the product. There's the lead scoring, which is our new fan score that we generate. And then there's the automated email workflows, but we're going to do that, but also provide probably chat, and other social native tools as well for that sort of automation workflows. Then, and of course, a lot of integration to the third-party systems. I think it's important to remember our solution is not about being the whole universe, because obviously, as I mentioned, the B2B and B2C world are still largely the players in this space. So for those truly D2C social first businesses, we may be their entire CRM forever. But for the other ones, it's really important that we provide connectivity to the tools and systems that they do use. And so every time you see integrated, that's where I'm saying where we'll be integrated into your HubSpot, your Salesforce, your Zendesk, whatever it may be.
Absolutely. And I think it's also important to note that a lot of folks have already invested a lot of time, money into a lot of other platforms, right? So the switching cost, it adds a ton of friction for new business. So the fact that you integrate in makes it really nice.
Absolutely. And by the way, like the great thing is because there is no coverage in our space, those tools aren't there. And honestly, I'm not worried about them, most of them getting there that fast, right? Like the big enterprise players, here's the interesting thing. It would be ridiculous for Salesforce to suddenly say, oh, you could just put your millions of followers right into the system too, right? Like their pricing models would break, all their contracts would blow up, right? Like it would be really, really difficult to start to manage it. And the pricing models are not organized for scale of tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions, right? In addition, if you're Nike, maybe you have 1 million, maybe you have 10 million customers in your CRM now, but you have 100 million followers on Instagram, right? So, there's a big delta there, I think, as well. So that's sort of like how I started to think about our solution, knowing our product now and saying, well, I'm making a comparison to these missing tools that are out there in the world. I need to sort of start to try and help understand how we are translating that value. So we're just about on time. So now I'm going to show you the actual deck. So this is all work in progress. So I apologize, so we have the cover screen. This is our branding. And so as you can see clearly on the front, Fanabulous CRM and marketing automation for social businesses. I like to put a date in. I've honestly even thought about putting a version in because you will often be having conversations with people over time. And I like to have a way to reference, which one it is. Sometimes an investor asks, well, for changes sometimes or things you maybe are missing. And I'd love to make sure that they know that I've made those updates. So I like having this little line here to just give me a way to adjust it or clarify who it's for potentially as well.
Makes sense.
On to the problem slide. So as you remember, I've tweaked that sentence a little bit, and I basically have come down to social businesses don't have the tools needed to prove ROI and drive revenue. And what I've tried to do here is to actually illustrate this gap. And this is not done, but because I don't think this stands out enough. But what I tried to do on the left-hand side was show sort of the traditional funnel where you move from awareness down to purchase. And as you can see, like traditional marketing leverages owned, earned, and paid into CRM and marketing automation tools, and ultimately down to revenue. And on the social side, however, it's just a big space. So it doesn't exist actually. Those tools are actually completely missing, right? Like there are no CRM tools and there are no marketing automation tools for purpose built for social, right? I think people have hacked certainly all kinds of random things together, but those kinds of things don't scale and they don't last very well and they leave most people wanting. And so I included this one statistic in here that only 24.7% of CMOs can quantitatively prove the impact of social media.
Yeah, and throwing out numbers onto your problem slide is always helpful because it kind of illustrates how big of a problem this is, right? So that's good.
Are there other, so now you've seen sort of the basics of this. Does the problem feel clear and big?
No, because there's no monetary aspect of it included on this slide yet, right? So if I didn't know anything else and I just looked at this and just said, okay, I would say, well, all right, 24.7% of all CMOs. Now, are we talking about, a billion or tens of billions or hundreds of billions of dollars worth of ad spend and social spend and everything else, right? So by putting that into this slide, I think it gets the message across more quickly.
Great.
So the top part of it, that's great, the problem statement, but now just illustrating the problem, having numbers there helps a lot.
Absolutely. And as you know, I do have the numbers.
Yeah.
And I know how much is spent on each of these pieces.
Yeah.
So
just, adding those up and saying, hey, total, this is what we're talking about. Boom. Yeah. Right. Now it's like, wow, didn't realize this was, $80 billion market.
Right. Okay. So absolutely. I do know these numbers. I will bring them over to here. I thought about that too. I got worried about I was cluttering it too much or whatever.
Yeah, no, that's definitely something to think about. And I think as you iterate through this, you try to figure out like what's important to have on the slide. You don't necessarily want to go into market, but you want to say, hey, this is money that's being spent uselessly.
Right.
It's not that there's no ROI on this money that's being spent. Right. And only 24.7% of it is being spent effectively. Right. So I think
I might be able to simplify this down a bit. Modern marketing, boom, or something like that. Like, so there's less words.
Yeah.
And then make this less wide and then spend more of my time on this column as well. All right, great. Well, I will continue to iterate, but I wanted to give you sort of the basics of where I was.
No, I think it's great.
Starting, but yeah, I also designed this because remember I did my research and my homework, so I knew what I could speak to.
Right.
So I had actually the diagram I originally made for it had numbers on all sides. So I just didn't do it yet.
Okay.
All right. So that's my problem. Then there's my market. And so I literally put a number in here. I said, we're targeting 127 million plus social businesses and influencers.
Yep.
And then I tried to go in and actually, now this one has some numbers, right?
Yep.
So I tried to show on the left-hand side, sort of like the stack, the market size. So here's that 65 million Facebook businesses, another 25 million Instagram business profiles. There's another 7 million Facebook advertisers, another 3 million Facebook story advertisers. And we can see some numbers now, like, for example, there's $179 billion spent by these guys over here. There's another 74 billion spent on social ads over here. And then on this side, I sort of tried to take a look at the influencer marketing universe as well. And so you can see how many of these influencer marketers there are, or sorry, potential influencers that we are working with. And again, $80 billion being spent on influencer marketing right now, estimated to grow to another $15 billion by 2022.
Got it. So slide is great. It's got all the numbers. Not all of the important numbers are popping out.
Okay.
Right. So if I'm spending 60 seconds looking at the slide, I'm going to I'm going to force myself to go back to the slide and really look at it again a little bit more carefully. Right. So now this is where, the teaser, the email, and the presentation deck kind of differ, right? So you might have something that's a little bit more in my face for the one that you email out. For the one that you're presenting, this could be fine. And you're hitting me with those numbers, as you're speaking to me. So those are some of the differences that you might have between those two decks.
Which numbers are more important?
Well, the numbers that are your market, right? Your total addressable market size. So you're not going after necessarily the if you come out and you say, hey, I'm going after 179 plus 74 plus 8 plus 15, somebody's going to look at you and say, yeah, okay, good luck with that, Greg. Right. Right. So you want to distill this down a little bit and say, look, this is how large the market is. And these numbers are only growing, but for the moment, we're going to be focusing on this part of the problem, this part of the market.
Gotcha.
Right? So, because you need it to be believable. If you come out and say, "Hey, we're going after $1 trillion market," people are going to be like, "Yeah, all right, that's wonderful, Greg, but I don't see you supplanting gold anytime soon."
Yeah.
Right. So it's got to be believable, right? So if it's like $50-60 billion that you're going after, that's a believable market size, right? And it's an achievable market size. Like you can actually go after that market and not just get lost, right? If the market's too large, you can get lost in going after that market.
Right. And honestly, I'm not sure yet.
Okay.
Which one it is, right? Yeah. Because my guess is it's this 25 million Instagram businesses, right? Is I have a two-prong approach. So I do plan to go after influencers and brands simultaneously because one of the loops we found is that brands bring us influencers actually when they want to work with them. And so it may be that I need to just show the 25 million Instagram influence business profiles and the macro influencers who are generating most of the influencer dollars.
Yeah.
As sort of, and maybe I'm thinking like to show it in a loop, right?
Okay.
Like, so they're engaging these guys and then these guys are trying to find these guys. And that starts to speak a little bit more to the dynamics of the market as well.
So you could have a second slide that goes into the market and distills it and says, hey, this is the broader market.
Yeah.
Right. And the part of the market that we're focusing on is this part, right? It's the Instagram business profiles and the micro macro influencers. Together, these three categories are estimated at X amount.
Yeah, that's right.
Right.
Okay.
So it could be a second slide, right? Don't feel like you can't have a second slide addressing the same topic. If it's necessary to distill it down, that's fine.
Okay. Well, I'll probably make a second one, and then I can always shove this into an appendix for later if people want to understand it too.
Yeah.
Okay, great. That's great. So yeah, it's getting there. But it's a start. And then the last one was my solution slide. And so, fairly clearly just stating we're building a CRM and marketing automation platform for social businesses. And I basically show this simple concept that we're turning followers into fans and the customers through three key deliverables in the product. One is our activation. So a simple way to activate and engage your social audiences. There's our fan bases, which is a system of record for all of your first party audience data. That's the CRM. And then there's our automations, which convert followers into customers and fanatics.
I love it. I think it's a great start. And for most people, even definitely for me, a starting point doesn't look as nice either. For me, a starting point is just a whole lot of text.
Right.
So I like the colors. I like the visualization. So as a start, I think it looks really nice, and it gets the point across well, right? So I think for everyone watching and those that are going to watch it, I think the real value is seeing how you got to this point, right?
Yeah.
Like that whole process, the amount of research that you've put into gathering all the data, the numbers, talking to folks, that part of it is really critical. And I think that, this is something that even, experienced founders don't necessarily know how difficult it's going to be until they start doing it again.
Yeah. And by the way, you guys, this is easy relative for me because my space is fairly well researched and talked about. A lot of times you'll feel very frustrated because there isn't necessarily like direct data or quotes or anything that makes it does. The fact that the research doesn't exist can work to your advantage or your disservice, right? And I think it's up to you to make that case, right, about why you have to find other indicators that point to that directionality. Like for me, there's so much data about social media, marketing, influencers, et cetera, that trying to put together this case is fairly straightforward, right? Like relative. Now, it doesn't necessarily materialize the pain. Fortunately, there's been studies on the pain as well. If you're going out and you're doing this without the benefit of like a space, you still got to likely have a North Star that is a space that is well known or well understood for you to sort of, and then show a way that you're going to fit into that space.
For sure. No, it's absolutely true. I know we've gone a little bit over time.
A little over, but I think it was worth it.
I absolutely think it was. Folks that have questions, feel free to ask them now, or feel free to ask them later on in the comments or email or on the website. And we will be on again. I think it's next Monday, right?
Actually, I think we have one on Friday.
Are we doing Friday too? Okay.
So I have a lot of work to do by Friday because I have 3 more of these to make.
Yeah. Ooh, wow.
But I will be in San Francisco for Dreamforce for the next 3 days. So
wonderful.
Not like I have anything else to do this week.
Yeah. Well, look, if you need to, we can kind of reschedule episode 5 to the following week.
How we're looking.
Yeah. So we
I like the challenge. So for me, like.
Yeah.
In some ways, the pressure is useful to force myself to try and get there. We may not have the same fidelity come Friday, but at some point we will go back through the whole deck. So you will see how these iterations have advanced as well. So
yeah,
I can minimally share the process for how I think about every slide, and I think that ultimately gets you to start to think about things.
Yeah, I think there was a question that somebody had asked if they can get a copy of this whole all the slides that you put together. I don't know.
They're in the video, so I think you can watch the video certainly.
Yes.
I'm not sure that I'm going to distribute.
Yeah,
per se.
I don't know if I would recommend that either.
Yeah. I think what I will do at some point, Pankaj, is I do want to convert some of these into posts.
Yeah.
So as we do that, I think we will write up things. Like, for example, I do want to spend some time covering the problem prism, and this may just be a standalone post that I actually do.
Yeah.
Just to try and help people understand sort of more of these thoughts and spell them out a little bit further. So I do think everything is here. So we're not going to hide what we've shown. Right. But I don't know that there's a lot of benefit either, because the process is what matters. And this isn't the process. This is the process filled out. So I think for now it's on you to extract that. But we will create more materials around this at some point.
Yep.
Well, thank you, everybody. This has been episode 104 of The Raise.
And we're tentatively scheduled for 105 on Friday at the same time.
Yes, we are. Where we'll be covering 3 more slides. I will not promise what slides. Maybe if I can figure out 3 other slides that are easier to do, I'll do them.
Yeah.
We will see you next. We will tune in on Friday. Worst case scenario, and just take some questions and answer. I don't want to ruin our time slot because people maybe have already bookmarked it. So we'll definitely show up. But we'll see how much we have available to talk about then. If you have questions, please post them. We'll try to address them.
Greg, did we lose you? All right. I'm not sure. We might have lost Greg. I'm still here. So what Greg was saying, if you have any questions, head over to foundercraft.com/raise. You can ask the questions there. You can see the full schedule for upcoming episodes, as well as watch previous episodes right on that same page. Or you can email us at raise@foundercraft.com. We will be able to answer any questions you have on next episode or the following episode. And we might even just do one episode where we're only answering questions that folks have. So if you've got any questions right now, feel free to ask them. I think I will see all of the questions. If not, we will. Oh, yeah, Greg dropped out. All right. Well, I think we're done. We will see you guys next week. I'm sorry, on Friday. And Venkatesh, sorry, you can watch the video again to see the process. But yeah, we're not going to be sharing the slides for this particular thing because they're very specific to Greg's startup. All right. Thanks again, everyone. And we'll see you guys on Friday. Thanks.